I am excited this morning to introduce our guest, Andrew Weinhaus. Andrew, it's good to see you.
Hey, Ed, good to see you.
Really wanted to spend a few minutes with you this morning for the benefit of the audience and really to lend some clarity here. So I've got a couple questions for you. 2026 sunset. So what's happening right now? What does that look like specifically that may make change in 2026?
Ed, thank you, Ed. That's a great question. So we are in a period of change. And for a lot of Americans, that I'll put it the way, have done well. It's not just the super wealthy. There are likely going to be some strategies that they're going to want to implement and put in place. The way that things worked, we did get from President Trump in 2017 a very, I'll put it this way, robust estate and gift tax exemption, currently at almost 13 million, 12,920,000. However, and it's a huge however, that act that President Trump got passed through Congress expires, and it's going to expire basically in 2026. So we're starting to run out of time. The window's starting to condense. A lot of people that I know, my own clients, in fact, are starting to want to get things in place even in 2024, because if the election were to go such that the Democrats are in office again, let's say President Biden, just for now, is the Democratic nominee and wins the presidency, it's very easy for him just to let the Trump Act sunset. And by sunset, that means we go back to where we were before the Trump Act was ever in place, and that puts us under President Obama's estate tax law, which will drop the exemption from probably somewhere around 13 to 14 million back to maybe as low as 5.8 or 6 million per citizen or permanent resident. So we're talking about a drop of more than half of U.S. citizens and residents' gift and estate tax exemptions. So a lot of my clients don't want to get right up against the precipice of that happening, and they're starting to make their gifts now, putting things in place where they're going to use, I'll put it this way, the extra 6 or 7 million that might go away if the election goes, I'll put it this way, the wrong way as far as estate and gift tax exemptions, and they want to use it now because it is a use it or lose it system. And that is likely going to drive a lot of estate planning for attorneys, CPAs, and financial advisors in 2024 leading up to this election. My, in a sense, kind of advice to clients as they're looking at this is don't wait until basically Thanksgiving of 2025, or maybe even Thanksgiving of 2024, but certainly Thanksgiving of 2025 to try to get this kind of planning in place if the law is going to sunset, because the attorneys, the CPAs that value business interests or real estate interests, even the financial advisors that work with clients, they're going to be buried with clients that came in the door earlier and wanted to get use of their gift tax exemption done before it might sunset and get a lot smaller. So what I'm telling clients to start doing that are interested is look at your asset portfolio, things like closely held businesses, real estate interests like the family farm or family vacation home, things of that nature are good candidates for gifting. And then normally what occurs is those assets are held by some kind of vehicle, an S corporation, an LLC, a partnership, and that family is going to want to gift non-voting units, ones that don't vote, don't control, to, let's say, a trust for the benefit of kids and grandkids. And they're going to hold on to the voting units of that entity that controls family land, a family business, because they're going to want to continue to control it. They want to control it. They just don't want to own all of it. And the way that they want to not own all of it is probably to make gifts of non-voting interests to something like an irrevocable trust for the benefit of kids and even grandkids. And that's where the CPAs get involved, because those non-voting units, this is a great deal and honored by the IRS and many courts. Those non-voting units can't be worth as much as a voting unit. They don't control. A third party's not going to pay as much for a non-voting unit as they would for a voting unit. And the CPAs or the CVAs, the certified valuation analysts, they're going to be able to compress the value of those non-voting units and make them less, and therefore leverage whatever gift tax exemption you're using, so it passes more real underlying value to the next generation without estate tax and without gift tax. And that's kind of the planning that we're seeing starting to be put in place.
Mm-hmm. Can you spend a few minutes of maybe talking about the myths around this, and maybe to really kind of home in the facts about what is being exposed here, and who does this apply to?
That's a great question, Ed. So yes, this is not just for the super wealthy. I'm just choosing the Warren Buffetts or Elon Musk. It's nothing like that at all. The current exemption, as I indicated, of about 13 million would drop down to about 5.8 million per citizen. And just to be clear, the estate tax, when assessed when somebody passed away, is on the fair market value of their assets on the date they die. And if that's further out in the future, and we're still at about 5.8 million or maybe a slight indexing for inflation, and their assets are exceeding that, they're very easily going to maybe get over that 5.8 million and owe an estate tax. And that estate tax, there's a lot of myths out there. That estate tax is taxed at 40%. It's due 9 months after someone passes away, or certainly if it's a married couple, normally at the last of 2 spouses to die. It's due in cash. They don't take normally IOUs. There's some circumstances where you can try to get one, but they're normally looking for a check to be cut to the United States Department of Treasury. And these days, many states are also imposing a state inheritance tax. California, New York, Minnesota, I believe Pennsylvania. So there's also oftentimes a state inheritance tax on top of that 40% federal rate. And there's been some, you're right, I'm going to put it this way, misinformation out there in the public about how this would be assessed. There's no getting around this. If it's due, it's due. It's 40% due 9 months after the person passes away, and it normally does have to be paid in cash. So for those that also think, well, even if it goes down, I'm not going to exceed it. If you're even in total net worth in the 4 to 5 million range, and you've got a decent life expectancy, if we go down to the lower exemption amount, you very well may owe some estate tax without some planning. At least here in the United States, our assets normally do over time increase in value, and they're normally going to, if you're anywhere near 4 or 5 million already, they're probably going to get over that estate tax exemption amount if it drops. That's the real hardcore facts about what's likely to happen.
Mm-hmm. So, Andy, where does one start? I mean, certainly what you maybe speak to, how do they get started, and how do you see yourself supporting and interacting in that process? I think it'd be helpful for them to get some context on that.
A great question, Ed. So the financial advisor, whether it's a new client they're meeting maybe for the first time or in the initial process, or a long-term client, probably the financial advisor ought to ask that client for kind of a personal net worth statement so they can get a feel for what they're worth, what they own, how much gifting, if any, they've done, and any previous use of their gift tax exemption. And the interesting thing is, when I talk to advisors, they're always, in a sense, astounded, but I don't think they should be, about oftentimes, no matter how successful that client is, about how little estate planning has been done. It might almost be, much to the advisor's surprise, you're almost starting from scratch and laying a foundation first with basic documents like medical directives, a revocable trust just to eliminate probate court administration, and then moving on to phase 2, which would be the gifting if they have significant assets. So they shouldn't be shy, the financial advisors, about asking for a net worth statement. And then once they have that net worth statement, the folks I work with at Next Point, Chris Jacob, Bob Strauss, and me as their outside counsel, we're happy to informally look at that statement if the advisor wants assistance and make some, in a sense, judgment calls for them as to some good kind of strategies to suggest, such as the gifting strategy if that client has a closely held business, a family farm, real estate holdings like rental apartments, whatever it might be, that would be good assets to gift. And that discussion always also leads to normally some financial planning for that advisor, normally also some life insurance being put in place. That's very common with this kind of planning, because the life insurance is going to be needed to provide liquidity when the elder generation, normally the financial advisor's client, passes away. There's going to be liquidity needed even if you significantly reduce the estate tax, because for things like maybe one child is in a business, but another child's not in a business. And even if you've gifted over a vast, in a sense, majority of the value of the business through non-voting units, maybe you want to have a way for the child that's in the business to buy out the child that's not in the business. Life insurance at the death of mom and dad provides that liquidity to do so, even if estate taxes have been reduced or maybe even eliminated through the financial advisor's suggestion. So my finding is, once they start down this journey, the financial advisor with the client, it's very possible from there that, in a sense, needs come up that they can solve with financial assets at their disposal through the Pinnacle Group.
Estate planning or estate tax planning, it can be overwhelming, or it's a very invasive, very egregious process.
Sure, and I could say this, that one of the true advantages of being with the Pinnacle Group is access to next point solutions. And Chris Jacob and Bob Strauss have been looking at wealth transfer planning cases like this for decades, and I'm happy to help as their outside counsel. We're there for the financial advisor, I'll put it this way, to provide as much or as little informal advice as they would like. We're never going to try to take a client away from the advisor's client's advisors, that we assume that client has competent counsel, a competent CPA. And if they don't have that, we can probably help them find that in whatever state they're located. We're never going to try to, in a sense, usurp the advisor group that the client has in place. We're there as the experts or wealth transfer experts for the advisor that's associated with the Pinnacle Group. And we can, in a sense, create presentations or help that advisor make it palatable and, I'll put it this way, as simple as it can be for that client, so that they can start the process if they've always been afraid to do that before.
So, Andy, we're at the throes of coming to the end of 2023. 2024 is right around the corner here, and it's, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation here, that that you're expressing concerns around not procrastinating, not delaying, and not waiting to the end.
The things that keep me up at night, and this isn't a political statement at all, is if the Democrats were to get elected in a big way. And some of the early indications, interesting enough, from some of the elections that were just held, is the Democrats are doing pretty well in some of these elections. If the Democrats were to take back control of the House and hold the Senate, if that were to happen, and if President Biden is elected, from Build Back Better in 2021, we got a pretty good idea of where this president thinks estate and gift and generation skipping taxes and the way it works ought to be set. And if he could, in a sense, press things at an even faster rate than will happen with the Trump sunset, a lot of tools that we have now might go away. For example, I use quite often with my clients a so-called intentionally defective grantor trust, or IDGT is the acronym, IDGT, where on purpose, the elder generation keeps paying the income tax on an irrevocable trust, but they don't have it included in their estate for estate tax purposes. And these have been wonderful tools to help transfer wealth for all sorts of reasons. As part of Build Back Better, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont put a provision in there that would have basically eliminated IDGTs as a planning tool. And President Biden was more than happy to go along with that and would have signed the bill had Build Back Better ever reached his desk. As we know, Joe Manchin kind of threw a monkey wrench in those plans. But as Joe Manchin has indicated, he's not going to be running for re-election in the Senate. And if it's a different Democrat there, by some chance, if the Democrats do hold West Virginia and you somehow get a Democratic majority in the Senate as well as the House, I could see something like Build Back Better being pushed again by a second-term President Joe Biden. That's the kind of thing, not making a political statement, that's just the kind of thing that from a tax perspective does keep me up at night. if we have that kind of switch.
Mm-hmm. So, that's great. And thank you, Andy. And I think for the benefit of our audience here, if there were like 3 things that you would want to leave our audience with as action steps, if you will, to say, guys and gals, these are the 3 things that I want to make sure that you get. And what would they be? What would be the 3 things that you want to impart to the 3 things you want to impart to our audience here?
Sure. Number one, pretty much for sure, absent some major change in the political landscape, this ultimate sunset in 2025 is very much now becoming a reality. If the Democrats do win, President Biden wins re-election, I expect that to occur. That's number one. Number two, you're not going to be able to wait till the fall of 2025 to start this kind of planning. The attorneys across the country, the CPAs and CVAs, all of those types are going to be buried already with clients coming in the door earlier, trying to do their gifting and use the extra exemption that might go away way earlier in the process. That's number two. And number three, get in front of the clients and have the discussion with them about this issue. If you've got an inkling that they've got a fair amount of assets, do it in 2024. Don't wait. Start the process. The process takes a while. And that's part of, I think, being a good financial advisor is at least asking the questions. It's up to the client then to go forward after that. But at least then the advisors, and we've got a great group in a sense with Pinnacle Group, have done their job and have said, look, this is something that should be on your radar screen. Better take a look.